Hello and welcome to another Motor1 Test Car Happy Hour. My name is Brett Evans, Senior Editor at Motor1.com, and I am joined by Jeff Perez, Managing Editor at Motor1.com, and we are here to talk some cars. How you doing, Jeff?
Oh, pretty good. How about you?
Doing great. It's a beautiful day. Life is
I know
good.
you're outside. I wish I could do this outside, but it would just smell like trash because we're by the dumpster.
That would be a problem. I don't have that issue quite as much. Does smell like dog poop sometimes, though, so that's no fun.
Well, you know.
Back to the cars. We got a fun one today. Jeff's been doing some traveling, and I've got some a pair of wacky cars that I never thought would be offered with a four-cylinder. So we've got some fun cars to talk about. Jeff, do you want to? Why don't we pivot over to you and discuss your track beast that you had a chance to get behind the wheel of last week?
Yeah, so last week I flew to Sonoma and I got to drive on that track, Sonoma Raceway, for the first time in the new 2024 Nissan Z Nismo. Ta-da! Yeah, so the Z Nismo, it's interesting. It obviously is, the performance version of the regular Z, which we all knew was coming. So 420 horsepower, 384 pound-feet of torque. The same twin turbo six cylinder that you get on the base Z and on the Q40 or the Q60 Red Sport model, the Infinity. Yeah, 0 to 60 in about 4.1 seconds. Totally redone suspension, reworked cooling, reworked bodywork for better aerodynamics. And then obviously that, the retuned suspension. I think the one big thing that everyone has really harped on so far is the price. $64,000 before destination, which is a lot of money for any car. At that
Whoa.
price, you can get a new BMW M2 at that price. You can get a 500 horsepower Mustang Dark Horse for about $5,000 less than that with the
Eesh.
manual, which the Z Nismo does not have either.
Ugh.
So I think it's a tough sell, but ultimately, I really did like this car a lot. On the track, they let us drive the Z Performance and then the Z Nismo sort of back to back on Sonoma. We took a few laps, and the difference between those two cars is like night and day because the suspension on the base Z, even on the performance model, has always been kind of too squishy or too like just that car has a little bit too much body roll, I think, for it to be a sports car competitive with like the M240i and the Supra and some of the other cars in that class. I always found it a little too soft, but they really fixed that with the Nismo. They tightened up the suspension a lot. You get the bigger tires, basically the same rubber compound as the tires on the GTR, which is awesome. It has a ton of grip. It is decently quick. Like it's really fast. The regular Z is already pretty quick. This one notches it up just a little bit, but it really didn't need to be notched up that much further than the base car. So all in all, I was pretty impressed by it. I just cannot imagine paying 65 grand for this car.
Yeah, that's definitely a sum. I'd be curious to know what some of the alternatives in that price class would be if you drove them back to back. I'd be curious to see how they shook out. I'd love to if anyone watching's got a comment on the Z, please leave it right here. We'd absolutely love to have a quick conversation. Just a quick reminder, wherever you're watching this, you can leave a comment. If you're watching it YouTube, Facebook, wherever, you can leave a comment and we'll get it and answer it live on the air. So be sure to do that. If you have any thoughts on the Z Nismo, 60 plus $1,000 is definitely a chunky sum of money. And I think you really have to like that, right, like that over the regular car for that price. J Dub's in with the first question. What's the proposition for this over the $59,000 Supra 3.0 Premium? And Jeff, you are an excellent person to answer that question because you like Supra quite a bit, don't you?
I do like the Supra a lot. Between the base Supra and the base, or the sorry, the this 3.0 Supra and the standard Z, the non-Nismo version, I think the Supra is like a runaway better performance car in my opinion. The Nismo and the Supra are pretty evenly matched, I would say, in terms of just performance, acceleration. Even though this thing has 420 horsepower and the Supra only has like 382, I think they're They're basically identical or really close 60 times. And the Supra suspension is really good. You get a manual in the Supra, which you do not get here, which is one of the big sort of another problem that a lot of people have with the Z Nismo. I would say they're actually pretty evenly matched. It's a tough sell for me. I would maybe go Z Nismo a little bit just because it's a little harder core, and it has really crazy grip and a lot of capability on the track. But if you can get a base Supra for 55 or whatever they're going for now, it's probably a better buy to save 10 grand and get like a slightly less capable car that's still super fun on the road.
That's so funny to hear you say that because I don't totally disagree. I think you might be onto something. It's just funny though because I feel like maybe a year or two ago, you and I had a very similar conversation regarding the base Nissan Z and the base
Uh-huh.
Supra. Because for 40 grand, you get 400 horsepower in the base Z.
Mhm.
For 40 grand, you only get 300 and a four-cylinder engine in the base Supra. And I feel like you and I had a similar conversation where I was arguing the merits of the base Z for that price, and you were arguing that the Supra was a better driver's car, even if it had less power. So, not that I disagree with you in the slightest. I do think it's kind of funny though that like the Nismo has become you're spending a little more money and you're maybe getting a little more car. It's not that like bargain basement sports
Yeah.
car offering like it was a year ago.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame, right? Like the regular Z is expensive too. It's not that car is not the most affordable in the class
Sure.
by a lot. And you're paying basically 22 grand more for the Nismo model than you are a base Z, which is just such a hard sell. I mean, I know you're kind of doing the same thing for like a base 2 series and an M2, right? But
Yeah.
that still feels like a lot more car the M2 does than the Z Nismo. So I don't know. I think
Yeah.
they might be sort of pricing themselves out of being competitive because again, another one that I mentioned already, the Dark Horse, which I drove and I really like that car as well. 500 horsepower, manual transmission, great suspension. Like that might be the one you buy if you want like a track capable sports car that's still pretty good on the road, and save yourself 15 grand before markup.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I would really be curious to see, I like the base Z a lot. The only problem I have with it are the seats, and these Nismo seats look
Mm.
so much nicer. Are they more comfortable? Is it a better interior at all?
The seats are way better. The interior hasn't really changed that much. They added some red stitching and some different graphics on the instrument cluster, but the seats are way better. They are Alcantara, right? I can't remember now. I think they're Alcantara with like a red sort of leather stripe down the center, and they're really comfortable. The adjustment hasn't changed, so you really can't move them up or down. You can like sort of twist the knob and move the bottom part of the seat like fore and aft a little bit, and then you still have the manual adjustment for the front and back, which means that trying to find a good seating position is a real pain. But the seats themselves are definitely better. Oh, I think Brett's muted.
Sorry about that. Lost you for a second. Yeah, that's the clincher for me. I feel like if you could, Nissan needs to offer those seats as an option at least. Like the
Hmm.
seating position in the standard Z car is so high, and you can't get it low enough. So hopefully, if these are like lower naturally, I don't know that I'd care too
Hmm.
much if they didn't have the adjustment. But
Putting
then
it
you also got to,
trying to wear a helmet in either of these cars though was a pain. Like you're like up against the roof, and I'm 6 foot. I'm not that tall, so it's like bouncing my head off the roof in either of these cars with a helmet on.
yeah, dude, that kind of ruins it for me. That makes me kind of
Mhm.
sad. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, Urban. I'm guessing that's how you pronounce your name. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry you don't get the Z Nismo in Europe, although maybe you're not missing out on too much. If you get the M2 and the Dark Horse and stuff like that in Europe, you might be better off with one of those. And yes, I agree with our producer Kyle saying that you guys get so many cool cars that we never get. That we don't feel too bad for you. Sorry, man. Um, why don't we pivot? We'll go a little bit more upmarket, similar price, and let's talk really briefly about the Mercedes-Benz C43, Mercedes AMG C43, which is what I'm driving this week. Kind of an oddball little car. The old C43 had a twin turbocharged V6 engine. This one has a single turbocharged inline four engine and a little bit of mild hybrid assist with an electrically assisted turbocharger. And we've had many arguments behind the scenes about what to call this thing. If it's turbocharged, supercharged, electrically turbocharged, a million different conversations. I'm just going to call it turbocharged with an electrically assisted turbo. Kind of a wacky little thing. 2 liters, 402 horsepower. Really, just kind of an incredible amount of power. And theoretically, it's not supposed to have any turbo lag because, previous versions of like electrically assisted turbochargers, um, there's like a compressor mounted before the turbocharger and like after the exhaust circuit. So that compressor pushes air into the turbocharger to spool it up really, really quickly. But there still is a little bit of lag. The Mercedes system uses actually an electric motor mounted right on the compressor wheel. And that electric motor obviously has instantaneous response. You put your foot on the throttle, the electric motor spins before the exhaust gas even has a chance to get to the turbo, and you've got instantaneous boost theoretically. I am going to say I've been a little bit disappointed with how difficult it is to drive this car smoothly, like even just around town. Like I feel like I'm always getting more boost than I want. Not quite as much. The throttle doesn't feel quite as linear as I was expecting. It kind of feels a little bit more like an on-off switch. And I've driven it in, the basic like economy mode where it's got the dullest throttle. I've driven it all the way up through Sport and Sport Plus, and it's still kind of hard to figure out exactly what you're getting when you push the throttle. Um, I need to go drive it really hard. I need to go see if it kind of comes alive. There's a great curvy road that we tested other cars on. We had the Corvette Z06 on it a couple weeks ago, and it's really fun. So I need to go get out there and see if this is any more appealing, when you're actually driving it hard. Around town, though, I'm kind of struggling with it just a tiny bit. As you can see, though, I think it does look really good. I really like the Panamericana grille that they have applied to the C. I think it kind of makes the front end look a little more aggressive and more interesting. And so, yeah, I kind of really dig it a lot in that respect, and very like a lot of wow factor. I drove it to, I drove it to like a little friend thing that I had on Monday night, and people were, like very impressed. It's like fun to get out of a nice car when you're around people, and so that was cool. That was a good feeling, but just kind of an interesting thing, and lots of great technology on the inside too. I love the adaptive, or not the adaptive, the adjustable ambient lighting is great, and a lot of cool things about this car that I do like a ton. Just kind of hoping I can figure out how to make it drive a little more smoothly, maybe this weekend.
Yeah, you drove the S63 E Performance, right? With the four, that one has the four cylinder.
No, S63 gets a V8. It's a twin turbo V8
Okay,
and it's a plug-in hybrid. So
gotcha.
they left the V8 for the S63. The C63 though does have the
Hmm.
turbocharged four cylinder
Okay.
with the plug-in hybrid, and that was our good pal Brandon who drove that. We haven't gotten behind the wheel of that one in the U.S. just yet.
Yeah, some of the newer powertrains I'm kind of curious about, having not driven a lot of them, to see how they sort of, especially with the AMG stuff, they're really going heavy on the hybridization and they're doing more of the plug-in stuff. I haven't really spent a lot of time in any of them, so I can't really say, but I'm curious because I don't know. Sometimes that they like to overcomplicate things. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And it sounds like in this case, it's maybe not working as well as it did with the previous generation.
Yeah, I don't know that I disagree with you there. I think that the previous generation was just like a little bit more seamless. And I had a GLC 43 when I was fairly new at Motor1, and that had the old twin turbo V6, and it was brilliant, like so good that I wasn't sure I could make the case for a GLC 63. The 43 was
Hmm.
just so fun to drive. It sounded so good, everything like that. And this was like obviously a larger, heavier SUV. With this being a smaller sedan, I would have expected it to drive with as much. And again, I need to go drive it hard and see. But yeah, so far it's maybe a little underwhelming in the powertrain smoothness department. The power on board, that 402 horsepower, is incredible. It makes it one of the most powerful four cylinders in the world. and definitely is like that's really thrilling. There's this thing's crazy fast. It'll go 0 to 60, and I've got it right here. Let me tell you, 0 to 60 in, come on, 4.6 seconds claimed. I imagine that's probably closer to 4 seconds. Just they're probably being a little conservative. It is blazing fast. And so that's really fun, and it's pretty comfortable inside too. It's got adaptive dampers, and the soft suspension setting really like gives you a lot of float and a lot of cush, which is nice. But yeah, I need to go drive it hard and see if I can get that powertrain to make a little more sense.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Urban says that I don't mind the hybrid systems in AMG, but they should be paired with 6 or 8 cylinder engines. I don't know. The 43s have always been kind of I don't mind a 4 cylinder in a 43 model, right? Does that make sense? Like it's just like you can still get a good amount of power, especially with the Mercedes 4 cylinders. You can still get a good amount of power and a good turbocharged engine, and make it feel like a performance car, which I think, like you said, the GLC 43 was really good. That was a really good uh, SUV. So I don't know. I don't mind the 4 cylinder here. I still don't love the design. I think it's a
Yeah.
little, I don't know, it's a little generic. It doesn't like, it's not offensive, but it doesn't really blow me away.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely agree, especially relating to the interior. I think the interior is a step down in quality from the old C class, which is a huge bummer. I hate it when it feels like things go backwards a little bit, but
Mhm. Oh, this I hate the little things on the steering wheel. What are they? Like
the the
the
knobs.
no, not the knobs, the little touch
Oh, right, right,
capacitive
right.
things on the steering wheel. They're
Yeah,
awful.
they do take getting used to. I hate that one of them does the infotainment. I don't mind the one that does the gauge cluster. I feel like I can get used to that okay, but the one that does the
Mhm.
infotainment is so needless to me. I guess if you really insist on keeping your hands on the wheel at all times, sure, but
But they used
unfortunately
to have
mine.
the little thumb things, right? The little thumb, controls, like, there were little thumb pads on the steering wheel.
Oh, yeah, 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 I get what you're
I
saying. The
like
little like, the
those.
tiny little ones on the, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. Those the new ones are awful. They are pretty terrible. Much too small.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, we'll see. We'll have to see if, if one of us gets to drive the C43 next time, hopefully that like electric like backfill will help smooth things out a little bit or whatever. But so I guess stay tuned. Now I'm really curious, moving pivoting a little bit. This one, by the way, this one costs $76,000 as tested. It's got special
Oof.
paint, special wheels. You can get one if you're willing to sacrifice quite a bit. You can get one for 59.9. I would definitely need at least a few, onboard goodies, and probably put my sweet spot right around 67 or 68. But still, that feels like a fair amount of money for this little car. And hopefully, people can forgive the four-cylinderness of it. Like we're in a brave new world. People hopefully don't care as much that their cars don't have big V8s anymore. But anyway,
Mhm.
pivoting a little bit to an even weirder car to get a four-cylinder engine is the Mercedes-AMG SL43, and they just dropped this one off yesterday. I haven't had a ton of time to drive it, but it's kind of weird because the SL43 comes in underneath the SL55 and the SL63. You've driven one of those, haven't you, Jeff?
Yeah, I had did I have the 63 or the 53? I don't remember. I had one of them. It was great.
How did you feel? Yeah, what were your thoughts?
Um, it's, uh it's a really good looking car. I think this is, like, one of the cars that has, like, pulled up in my driveway, and it's like, "Wow, that is a great looking car." The ride was good. I think it's a little too stiff to be, like, a nice cruiser, maybe. Like, it felt a little too harsh all around. I really wanna say I had the 63, and that might have been why, and it just felt really aggressive, but I think it's a good car otherwise. I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm excited to put this one through its paces a little bit more. I'm really just so curious to know how much that V8 plays into the driving experience, because this one again has a four-cylinder turbocharged 2-liter engine with again that electric turbocharger boost. Powers down a little bit on the C class. It only has 375 horsepower instead of 402. and it goes 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, which again is a little bit slower than the C class according to Mercedes. So kind of a curious offering, especially since it starts at $110,000. So I don't know. This one I theoretically I'm struggling with this one a little bit more than any of the other like downsized turbocharged. This one feels maybe just like a bridge too far for me. I agree with you completely that it is a gorgeous, very impressive looking car. And it's really nice to look out the window and look at on the driveway for sure. Um, but yeah, it's a little bit lighter. If there's anything going for it, it's a little bit lighter than both the SL55 and the SL63. So here's hoping that that makes it feel nimble. Also, this is kind of curiously, this is the very first four-cylinder SL class roadster since the 50s when you could get a 190 SL, which was kind of aimed at privateer sports car racers and stuff like that. That was like the little brother to the 300 SL. With a smaller engine and much lighter and more attainable and more nimble for people who are doing like the 50s and 60s equivalents of autocross and stuff like that. So curious that this one is, curious that where they're positioning this one. So
I like it. I like
yeah,
that there's a four-cylinder option because I don't know. It seems like a lot of well, not a lot because there really aren't a lot of convertibles left anymore. Like premium, convertibles. I
yeah,
think the Z4 and this one are two of the few, and the Z4 really doesn't do anything for me. But this one makes more sense to me with the four-cylinder. It's still expensive as hell, probably too expensive,
yeah.
but like you really don't need hardcore performance in a convertible. I really can't think of a situation where I need the 63 model to do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds or whatever it does, and just like no.
Yeah, I'll report back once I get some more seat time just to let you know how I feel about the ride. You and I disagree on ride and handling balance more than probably anything else in the world,
Uh-huh.
but I still would be curious going in with some of your notes. I'd be curious to see how the 43
Well,
ride
so
feels.
I just opened my review of the SL55, and it said I wrote that it had a great ride. So I must have just been misremembering. I don't know.
You're in a good mood that day, better mood than you
I
are
guess
today, I
so.
guess.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That makes me feel better. I'll sample it. I'll probably come back and say that it's the most backbreaking thing I've ever driven, and I can't imagine how anyone would ever possibly. Just because you and I feel like we feel very very different driving impressions sometimes.
I don't know.
Um,
Mercedes especially just sort of has that reputation too, right? Of like the AMG models just being so damn stiff that it's like really backbreaking and hard to drive some of them every day. That EQE AMG I just had recently was like really rough.
yeah,
So
it's weird too because I've never driven one, but in the '90s, the contemporary reviews all said that like the AMG E55, for example, was like a muscle car. It handled terribly, it rode beautifully, and it was just a big old lump of V8 power up
mhm.
front. And I feel like maybe they like pivoted too hard. They're tired of being called, pillowy, soft, cushy rides. So they pivoted too hard and made things handle incredibly well, but then, lost a lot of that like cushy Mercedes-ness. So
Yeah.
um and I feel like they're maybe finding a little bit of a middle ground. That especially that S63E performance that I drove, that thing was insane. It would rip your face off in a canyon for sure, but then it also was really, really smooth and really soft, kind of like Lincoln like almost, where it would just kind of like
Mhm.
bound and like bounce a little bit over bumps. It was beautiful, and the C43 does that a little tiny bit too. Like there's kind of a amount of like there's like a decent amount of like cush and like absorption before you toggle it over into sport. I was
Yeah.
just gonna jump in the comments. J Dubs has some great points here that this is $110,000 worth of SL, and the F Type starts well below that and gets kind of a lot more meaty power out of it. And that's kind of a hard one to deny. You like the F Type pretty well, don't you, Jeff?
I love the F Type. Yeah. The SVR was the only one that I was like, kind of on. It was too hardcore still. But you can get a convertible V8 F Type for not that much money, and that is a fantastic car.
Maybe a little more visceral too. Like the exhaust note of this SL43 is cool. It sounds sounds kind of like shrill and brappy and stuff like that, which is fun. But that V8 in the F Type, even if you're in the base V8, it just sounds so brilliant.
Yeah.
And then yeah, there's always the 911 question too. As tested this, excuse me, as tested this SL43 Roadster. It's $119,000. 3,200 of that is the Designo, or not the Designo, the manufacturer Starling Blue matte paint. This one, the one you see on the screen, is gloss. The one that I am driving right now is the same color, just matte. 3,200 bucks for a paint color. You know, Mercedes loves to do that. So knock that out, and you're down to $115,000 worth of SL class. That's not going to quite get you into a 911, especially not a 911 convertible, but could definitely get you into like a hard loaded Boxster GTS or 25 years edition or something like that. And that, I think that would probably give you a more sporting driving experience if that's what you're after.
Hmm.
Urban's got a great question. How does it compare to the 8 Series? You've driven the 8 Series cab, yeah?
I think I drove the M8 a long time ago, convertible.
Huh.
And I don't really remember too much about it, to be honest. I know it also had a very rough ride, but that's pretty typical for the M cars.
We had that M8 coupe a few years ago that we drove from New York to Pennsylvania, or New York to
Oof.
North Carolina, and that
Hmm.
one I remember being pretty aggressive and pretty backbreaking on long trips.
I
That was
did
a
not
coupe,
like that
obviously.
car.
That's so funny. I agreed with you on that trip a lot with all the cars that we had there. But it's so funny that our other former colleague Clint loved the 8 Series and wanted the 8 Series like
Hmm.
just every day of his life is what he wanted. And then you and I were kind of like, it like does the thing, but I don't know. I wasn't super
I
impressed.
was I was happier driving that Shelby with the Recaros, uh, like just over long stretches than I was in the M8. I was just so uncomfortable in that car.
Yeah, it was a definitely like a divisive car for sure. I would be curious. I'd love to line like these two great, 8 Series and SL are two great names from each of those companies' respective histories. I'd love to line them up together and see how they do. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the SL43, Mercedes' first 4-seat 4-cylinder SL, and only its second SL with a 4-cylinder in 70 years or something like that. So it's a looker. I again, I need to drive it pretty hard, and I'll hopefully report back next week and let you know how I think about that 4-cylinder. Pretty cool car though. I'm curious, definitely curious.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the pièce de résistance of this week? The other car that you've been driving?
Yeah. Well, technically, isn't it the most affordable of the four? Yeah,
Oh
it
yeah, by
is.
a long shot.
So last week. I drove the Hyundai Ioniq 6, which is their new compact electric sedan that sort of slots underneath the Ioniq 5, with the same battery platform, all that stuff. Fully electric, obviously. You get 320 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. And then depending on the trim, you can get up to 361 miles of range for rear wheel drive. I think that's just for the base SE, and then 305 miles on the SEL and Limited, with rear wheel drive, and then 270 miles on the one I drove, which is the basically fully loaded Limited all wheel drive with the 20-inch wheels. And it's a really great car. I think the design can be polarizing, but I kind of fell in love with it after a few days. There are definitely some weird angles, like on the back, you get that hump with the little spoiler back there, sort of like a double spoiler almost. That gives it kind of a weird shape. But it's about efficiency too, right? Like the coefficient of drag on this car is really really low. I'm trying to look up the number right now. 0.22 with the 18-inch wheels. So it's like slightly lower than the Model 3, um, which makes
It's
it a really
it's
go ahead.
also better than like the EQE sedan. It's
Mhm.
like a pretty incredible achievement for such a small vehicle. It's easy to make long cars aerodynamic. A small one that's really hard, and this is a pretty incredible achievement.
Yeah, no, they did a really great job with that, and without making the design look totally wonky, which I think is my problem with a lot of the Mercedes EQ stuff, where they quote efficiency and that kind of thing. But in terms of driving, it's not really a sporty car. It's not a sports car. It's decently quick. It has like a good punch off the line, and the steering is really nicely weighted. Like the suspension is balanced. It just handles really, really well. It is just such a fun little car to drive around. I just had such a good time driving this car, like just to go get food or to the grocery store. Because there are some cars you're like, all right, I'm just gonna get in this thing and go to the grocery store and not think about it. Um, but this one, you kind of like have a good time just going and running errands, and it's not overly sporty. The interior is sort of on the cheaper side, and I think that's one of the big problems that we generally have with a lot of the Hyundai Kia stuff these days, especially on the lower trim levels. But it's weird to me that this is the limited model, which is basically fully loaded, and the interior still felt really cheap. There were some really hard plastics, some really like the gray plastic in the center console was weird. It was like I don't even want to say what the first thought that came to my mind was, but it was like that kind of cheap plastic you find in like the bathroom, like public restrooms. I don't know. That's probably not Hyundai's probably gonna hate to hear that if they see this. Um, but that was my big complaint. Otherwise, I really, really like this car. This one was, like I said, fully loaded, long range, 20-inch wheels, limited model. It was 50. Let me look at my sheet. $57,000. So not cheap. It's not an affordable car if you get it loaded, but you can also get the base trim for like 41, 42,
I
and
I did
that's
not realize it was going to be that close to the like Z NISMO. I thought it was like 10 grand cheaper.
well,
That's
so did I until I looked at my. Let me see.
that is not a lot cheaper. I mean, you could like, for example,
Uh,
you could get a base model that C43 starts at 59.9. That's not a ton
yeah,
cheaper than that. I mean, obviously, totally different car, but still.
yeah. I'd have to drive a base model to be honest, or like a lower trim of this to see if the $57,000 is worth spending extra on. I would say no, probably just based on my experience with the interior. Um, and you can get the higher range. You can get more range with the base SE model. You can get almost you get 360 miles of range. So I don't know if it's worth spending almost 60 grand on the Ioniq 6, but I really liked it. I had a good time with this car.
I'll be curious. I drive it in 2 weeks. I get the Ioniq 6 SE front wheel drive, so it should be that super long range model with maybe a little bit more like reasonable pricing. And I'm going to be curious to look at that. And the lower in the price range you get, the more that like the plastic feels acceptable. It's not quite as shocking to be spending 60
Mhm.
grand on a car with a relatively economical interior. So we'll see what the price of that one comes in at, and if the interior materials feel appropriate. I do remember,
Yeah.
so we had the Ioniq 5 a couple years ago, and we compared it against Volkswagen ID4, and they both had like pretty similar interior quality for sure. I think I liked the the Ioniq 5 better just because it was more like reasonable, like it was laid out better, and
Mhm.
the great thing about that car specifically is that big flat front. The center console moves around and the front floor is totally flat, but this car doesn't have that, does it?
No, it's a more traditional sort of center console. There's a little bit of space underneath if you like where the gear selector is. Just underneath that, there's like a little cubby under there. But other than that, it doesn't have like that typical space that the Ionic 5 does with that just like flat floor and all that stuff up front. So yeah, it
Does
wasn't.
it
I mean,
feel?
the
I was just gonna. Does it feel cramped at all? Does it feel smaller?
Um, I mean, smaller than the Ionic 5 for sure, but that's just based
Sure.
on just the body style, but not any smaller than I don't know. I just drove an Elantra hybrid recently, and it feels about as roomy as that does,
Okay.
maybe a little bit more. So it's definitely it's like there's nothing remarkable about the interior. I guess is another complaint. Just alongside the materials, like it's nothing special. You do get the big screens, like all
Mhm.
Hyundai's do at this point. I don't know exactly what size, but it's the dual sort of the screens, the instrument cluster and the touchscreen beneath that one piece of glass, which is pretty neat. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd pay 57 grand for it though. Again, with the interior.
Yeah, I definitely would be curious to see how the SE shakes down. Hopefully a lower price makes it a little more appealing. Um, and the range too. Like this is outside the Lucid Air, isn't this the longest range EV sold in the US right now?
I think so. Yeah, 361 miles is trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of any other ones. The problem is that, I mean, I don't know. This is very dealer and region specific, I guess. But the SE model, I bet, will be harder to find. I think they're not going to stock as many of those. They're probably going to try and force you into the mid range, the SELs or
Sure.
the limited, like the one here, which is kind of a shame because like you can at 41 or even 45, which is what the SE starts at. I think this is like a fantastic car.
Yeah.
I can't really think of many cars that are, there's really no car that looks this good at 45 grand, I don't think. um, Drives really really well. The interior again is like not amazing, but for 45 grand it's not that bad. um, so I don't
Yeah.
know, I would say it's a very good car for the right price.
Yeah, I'm excited to sample it out. I've been super curious about this car ever since it came out. I think it's such a interesting looking car.
Hmm.
I love there's like some major like Saab vibes going on with that rear end with like the weird double spoiler. Like it's just such an interesting looking car, and I'm really very curious to see how it does. Kind of at that lower price point. I think it's going to be a knockout. I think people are. I maybe wouldn't go so far as to say they're sleeping on Hyundai's electric cars because I feel like they are pretty popular right now. But this one's going to be super appealing. If anything is going to convince people to fall in love with sedans too, like I feel like this car's crazy styling is probably going to help.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
yeah,
so Urban was asking about compared to like Model 3 or BMW i4. Um, the Model 3 is definitely a more premium car inside. Whether or not you like that minimalistic kind of approach with just the screen and nothing else, I think it's definitely feels more premium. The Model 3 does, and I would say the same about the i4.
yeah,
Even the base i4 is a nicer car, but I mean it's also a Hyundai, so it's not meant to be a premium car, right? It is meant to be an affordable EV. So I think you can sacrifice some of the material quality and the interior design a little bit at for the right price, because really it doesn't really have any true competitors, does it? Non-premium electric sedans right now.
not really. I mean, the closest competitor is honestly the Model 3 because it starts at about 45 and goes up to 60 if you don't get into the performance variants. So
Hmm.
that is kind of I'm fact checking myself right now, and I was surprised to see the Model 3 be that like relatively inexpensive. So
Hmm.
that's kind of a curiosity.
Yeah, yeah, and Model 3 prices were high, I think, for a little while,
Yeah.
and then I think they just recently brought them down again, which makes it more interesting. That would be a good comparison if we can get the two together, or even an i4, all three of them, and do like a three-way sort of EV sedan comparison.
Yeah. I really love I need to drive a base model of the i4, but I drove the eDrive 40 a couple of months ago, and I loved it so much more than I thought I was going to. It like instantly became my favorite member of the 4 Series family. Like it just felt like really well balanced. It kind of felt like an older, 5-year-old or a 10-year-old BMW where everything just kind of works and
Hmm.
doesn't like ask a ton of you. It just kind of does what you want it to do. So I'd be curious to see how, like maybe a loaded Ionic 6 versus a base i4 and a base, or like a fairly well equipped Model 3. I'd be curious to see how they shake down.
Yeah, for sure. And then the N model, whenever that happens,
Honestly,
we know Ionic 5 is out there. Ionic 5N is out there now. We're actually going to drive that pretty soon, and then the N version of this, I bet, will be really fantastic.
yeah. I mean, every other end product, especially like we haven't driven the Ionic 5 yet, but every other end product that we've driven is stellar. Like
Hmm.
they find a way to turn. You were just in this Elantra hybrid, which I remember you saying you liked it a lot. You thought it was like a good, just like a solid commuter car, like a really pleasant vehicle to just kind of commute in. But then they
Hmm.
go from that to like this insane, brilliant Elantra N.
Hmm.
Everything that you're talking about, the Ioniq 6 sounds similar. Like it's just like a good car. You just enjoyed kind of just tootling around and it was a solid vehicle. I really hope that they're able to apply that same like mental formula to the N version to make it just a brilliant driver's car.
Yeah, Hyundai does a good job of that because like the Elantra hybrid is like you said, it's just like not a amazing car in any respect. It's just like a very, very good economy car, and it has, you can get 500 miles on a fill up with that thing, and it's like fine to drive but not dynamic. And then you go drive the Elantra N, and it almost feels like a totally different car. Just the way they tune it, the way that turbocharged engine is, the steering. It's just such a difference, such a contrast from the base version to the N version, that I'm hoping they do the same thing here. But I think a lot of the times when we drive these performance EVs, the problem is that they don't really like move the needle far enough, right? So like the iX is a good example of that, and the was it the M60, that just doesn't feel that much more special. And then also like the Kia EV6 GT, it's fast and it's cool, but it's expensive and it really isn't that much more dynamic than the base version. So hopefully Hyundai figures out how to sort of bridge that gap instead of just trying to slap more power on it and hope that people will pay an extra 10, 15 grand for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there needs to be a lot of good adaptation in there to make it feel a little more interesting and a little more special. So I'm just kind of doing some bench racing right now. We've got Jeff's $58,000 Ionic 6. You can get I was wrong. You can get a Tesla Model 3 performance model for 58, I think is what it starts at, 50,
Hmm.
something like that, somewhere in the mid 50s. And then an i4 eDrive 35 is 51,000 proposition. So between
Hmm.
the three of those, I'd love to hear from you, Jeff, but I also want to hear from some commenters. What's going to be your pick for a mid $50,000 four door EV?
Oh man. Um, if we're talking just, I would have to go Model 3, I guess, because of the performance, trim, and I do like the interior of that car, even though it is pretty basic. It's nice and clean, and that car drives really well too. Yeah, I guess I would go Model 3.
I I maybe wouldn't be able to do the like Tesla ownership, like the like
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. We don't need to get into that, I guess, too hard. I might have a hard time picking the Model 3. One, because everywhere I go in Southern California, there's a row of Model 3s sitting in front of every store of every. I don't know that I could like. I don't know that I could just buy in so hard into the idea of being, like part. Anyway, I would probably do i4 or Ionic 6.
Right.
Oh, and J Dubs brings
We
up a
totally
great
forgot
point.
about Polestar too, didn't
Polestar,
we?
which is unfortunate because it's a brilliant car. It's so good.
Yeah. I love the Polestar too. I would actually probably go Polestar 2 over any of these.
I might agree with you. The range is a little lower, but it's a little more of
Mhm.
a like interesting choice. I think I'd probably go i4. I love the i4, the way that it drives so much. I think it looks decent. I can get over the grill, and the rest of the car looks pretty good.
Mhm.
I think I'd probably do i4, but Polestar would maybe be a close second, and then it's hard to argue with the value you get out of a Tesla though. Like every time I try and kind of like be like not like other people and try and
Mhm.
like argue a different vehicle than a Tesla, I just come back to like 333 miles of range, 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, $55,000. Like that's really hard to argue with.
Yeah.
So
Kyle's also made a comment. We were just talking about the Polestar 2 becoming more and more reasonable on the used market. Uh, yeah, don't tell everybody that because I want to buy a Polestar 2 and I hope they stay at 35 grand for a few more years before the secret gets out and everybody goes and buys one.
yeah, I think you're still probably pretty safe on that one there, dude.
Yeah.
Like it's not I don't see Polestar 2 values shooting up. You let
Yeah.
me know when the Polestar 1 gets reasonably priced
Oh my
because
gosh.
I would sell all of my vestigial left organs for one of those.
Polestar 1 and another, well, this is not an EV, but the Alfa Romeo 4C was another one we were talking about yesterday, it being like, they're getting pretty cheap. You can get an Alfa Romeo 4C for under 50 grand, which is pretty crazy for how good looking that car is.
It's a looker. I feel like nothing could possibly be more expensive than a cheap Alfa Romeo. Like,
Well,
people
yeah,
say that
that's
about every luxury car, and I feel like it's especially true of a cheap Alfa Romeo, but maybe not.
yeah. You want to
Yeah.
do a? Should we do a preview of what we're driving next?
Heck yeah, let's do it. What do you
Well,
got coming?
so I'm flying to Vancouver on Monday, and I'm driving the Mercedes Maybach EQS SUV, which is going
Okay.
to be. I bet it's going to be insane because just the previous Maybach stuff. I mean, you've driven some of the Maybach stuff too.
Mhm,
Like how they just go all out with that
mhm.
kind of thing. I'm curious to see how it translates to an EV though, especially the EQS, which I thought was for as ungainly as it looks, I think it's a pretty good SUV. So hopefully it's even better with all the fancy Maybach stuff on it.
I'll also be curious to learn that too. I have very little love in my heart for the EQS SUV. I think it's like
Mhm.
a weird size. It's exterior the same as a GLS, but way smaller inside. It's fine though. I guess I can't complain too much. So I'm curious to see how the Maybach does, especially when it goes hard into that like two rear seats, like super comfortable, like VIP style
Yeah,
transport. So yes, keep us posted.
for sure.
Um, my next like at home review is going to be that Ionic 6, so I'm curious to see how that one shakes out. But next week I get to go drive a pretty cool. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but a pretty cool plug-in hybrid supercar. And
Oh yeah.
you can connect the dots on that one. I'm not sure how much is allowed to be talked about, but there will be an embargo on that. There will be a story coming to Motor1 sometime in October on a very, very cool plug-in hybrid Italian supercar. So very excited for that one.
That'll be a good one. I'm excited to read your review for that one. I'm curious.
Yeah, man. I feel like it's time for you to head over to Europe and drive some supercars sometime soon. Make that happen.
Yeah.
I feel like it's your turn.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I think that probably just about does it. If you have any further questions, drop a comment on YouTube or on Facebook. We can come back and answer them. Want to say thanks to the folks who are commenting, J Dubs and Urban, and always thanks to our pal Kevin, Kevin from Florida, for rejoining us. You're one of the stalwarts, so thank you for being here. Jeff, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here, and glad you were able to go do some cool stuff in fast Nissans and interesting Hyundais.
Oh yeah. It's always a great time.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I think that about does it. We will be back with Motor1 Test Car Happy Hour number 59 next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. So yeah, come on and join us and bring some questions. We'll have some fun.